The Occupy movement received a boost yesterday from senior citizens to send a message to Congress about plans to cut Medicare and Social Security cuts that will likely come out of the Gang of 12. Hundreds of senior citizen patriots occupied a downtown intersection in Chicago. They were joined by nearby members of Occupy Chicago and other grassroots organizations, as well as a few members of Congress, including Representatives Jan Schakowsky and Danny Davis. Ultimately, police moved in to break up the demonstration, hauling away 47 people, mostly senior citizens, in handcuffs. We can add their names to the growing list of 3,362 patriots who've been arrested since the Occupy movement started more than a month and a half ago. But these mass arrests of patriots instead of banksters don't jive with the attitudes of most of the American people. A new NBC Wall Street Journal poll shows Occupy Wall Street popularity has surged to 60% of Americans supporting the basic sentiments of the occupiers. That's twice as much support as the Tea Party received in similar polls in the past. So while more and more Americans seem to be getting it when it comes to the 99% movement, there's still one group that's woefully ignorant: the corporate media. For more on this, I'm joined by Russ Baker, investigative journalist and editor of the website WhoWhatWhy.com, as well as author of the book Family of Secrets: The Bush Dynasty. Russ, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be here.
Great to have you with us. Gandhi was rumored to have said, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, then you win. Does that quote summarize the arc that Occupy Wall Street is going through with regard to the corporate media?
It certainly does. As you may know, we have a piece up on our website, WhoWhatWhy.com, about a remarkable piece in the New York Times where the New York Times public editor wrote a column where he was trying to figure out what in the world is Occupy Wall Street about and how should the media cover it. And then he reached out to a few colleagues, two former top editors who now run journalistic training centers, and he asked them, how should we cover Occupy Wall Street? And I was just absolutely astounded at what they said. May I read a couple of those to you?
Yeah, if they're short, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so here's one. This guy runs a place called the Poynter Institute, former managing editor of the St. Petersburg Times. He says, to my mind, the compelling question is, how come these people are so angry? And then the other one, he quotes, who runs another journalism school, used to run the San Jose Mercury News. He says, I can't paint a picture of typical leaders and followers. Have I simply not followed it closely enough? And then he says, are the protesters ex-Lehman millionaires who lost it all in the meltdown? Or are they regular people who just can't get jobs?
Yeah,
I mean, this is just astonishing that these guys who are supposed to be the professional question askers and the narrators for the American people are so out of touch with the concerns and the traumas that ordinary Americans are facing and have been facing for years.
Yeah. The 70 students walked out of the Harvard economics class being taught by former Bush economic advisor Greg Mankiw. And they said, we're walking out today to join a Boston-wide march protesting the corporatization of higher education as part of the global Occupy Wall Street movement. Since the biased nature of Economics 10 contributes to and symbolizes the increasing economic inequality in America, we're walking out of your class today both to protest your inadequate discussion of basic economic theory and to lend our support to a movement that is changing America's discourse on economic injustice. Sounds like this thing really has some legs, even though the press that you were just citing is clueless.
Well, they really are clueless. One of them says, why are they protesting now? The recession has been going on for 4 years. And as I pointed out in our article, this is not a protest about the recession. It's a protest about a system that is increasingly corrupt at its core on so many different levels. Economically, as you just pointed out, Tom, the educational system, increasingly clear that it's not designed to encourage people to think for themselves, but to create compliant employees in the corporate world. These kinds of things, and that places like the New York Times don't understand that this is an organic movement that represents all of our concerns on so many different levels. That is really, really telling.
Yeah, and speaking of organic and you know, the idea of crossing lines, shall we say, there's been a lot of press attention to protesters versus police. And yet down in Atlanta, something really remarkable has happened. You want to tell us about that?
Sure. Well, as I understand it, the people in Occupy Atlanta had some problems, as other similar protests in other cities do, staying where they were. And at that time, they received an email from the wife of a police officer in suburban Gwinnett County. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sorry?
Gwinnett County. I used to live in Atlanta. Yeah.
Gwinnett County, right, right. And she basically said that we are about to be evicted from our home. Her husband, a police officer. And so Occupy Atlanta decided, well, we're going to go occupy their front lawn. And they've gone there in solidarity with this police officer and his family, and they are helping them out. And so far, they have prevented their eviction. And I think this is very significant because this idea of police officers and demonstrators being at each other's throats, that's an artificial construct, since police officers are working class and they own homes and they suffer just as much as everybody else. It's very important to see this not as I think that the 1% of the 1% would like it, which is a bunch of disheveled people against law-abiding people, but the fact that the people who are the initial group that have gone out there represent a much broader and more diverse group that is central to the entire American experience. And that's what I love about this situation there in Atlanta, where they are finally, at least symbolically, coming together.
Yeah, so well said. Russ Baker, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
And keep up the great work. It's just spectacular reporting you've been doing for years and years. Luckily, Occupy Wall Street has been able to grow and flourish despite the lack of reliable coverage from the corporate media. Let's hope it continues.